Good evening and welcome to this month's Whisky Me live tasting. Thanks ever so much for joining us. Sorry for the slight delay getting started there this week. Well, it was only a 1 minute delay. I think we've probably been later than that in the past. We've got two fantastic whiskies and two fantastic guests joining us this month. We're going to begin with Isle of Raasay Distillery, where we're going to be joined by Gabriel. And then in about 15 or 20 minutes, we've got Jon Anders from Abasolo Distillery in Mexico, who's going to be joining us to talk about that. So I hope you got your drams ready. I have mine. Hope you're comfortable. I've got glasses, all that kind of stuff. And we shall begin. So as I mentioned, first of all, we're going to go to the Isle of Raasay. Hey, Gabriel.
Hello, hello.
How you doing?
Doing absolutely grand, thank you. I've just been reading the chat, and Carlos, you're absolutely right. It's quite likely I gave you a tour back last year. My hair's probably a lot longer. It's been a wee while since I've had a trim, but when I said I was Islander number, I moved to Raasay when I was about 6, and at the time the population was quite low. I think it was 142 is what I probably said.
Wow.
Back around then. So population's gone up a wee bit since, but yeah, cool.
142. I didn't realize that there was such a small population. I mean, it is a small island, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely tiny. I think we're now up to 179. So that was the last census done by the hydroelectric scheme back in February. So I wasn't a part of that one because I was in Glasgow at the time. But yeah, we're climbing up steadily for the first time in like 200 or so years, which has been excellent. But yeah, fantastic. I can't believe a familiar face. This is brilliant.
So that's a population growth of like 20 or 30. It's like, what is it? It's like 20% population growth. That's dramatic, really, I would say.
For Raasay, it's incredible. Long history of stuff that I will not get into because I don't want to take up too much time. I could go on about it for hours if you really wanted. But for just now, yes, it's an incredible thing to finally have not just Raasay on the map, but also, you know, people to be on Raasay as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, do you want to tell us a little bit about the sort of background of the distillery, how it came about? Because it is a small island. Maybe talk about the location as well and all the kind of maybe a potted history of how it came to be.
Yeah, cool. So when it comes to the distillery being founded in Raasay, you of course have R&B distillers, Alistair and Bill, came together to build a distillery and work on a project. Bill went to university with a man by the name of Ian Hector Ross. Ian Hector Ross, his wife is from Raasay, and the way I've heard it is that Ian Hector basically dragged Bill up by the scruff of the neck up to the island to show him the current building the distillery is now in. That building, known as Bordale House, was built in the 1830s. It was designed by a man by the name of Alexander Ross and was built as a sort of servants' quarters for Raasay House at the time, owned by a different man. And over the last sort of century, it has been a hotel, it's been a post office, it has been a butchery, and in 2013 it was a listed building, it's derelict. And so when the distillery came in, what they wanted to do and everything that we're sort of doing here on Raasay is about matching the island. And we didn't want to knock down the building because that would not be matching Raasay. So what they did was they kept all of the old Victorian stone from the main part of the building, the 6 rooms of the hotel, which are available to stay in. You're more than welcome to book them if you're interested. And we constructed the building starting in 2014, finished in 2017, and the first spirit came from our stills in September 2017. So obviously still very, very young distillery in that regard.
Nice. And in terms of making a whiskey for Raasay, how do you go about sort of shaping what that's going to taste like? Because obviously there is some kind of precedent set by neighboring island of Skye and I guess the other Hebridean islands as well, but you know, you want to put your own kind of spin or identity on it. So how do you sort of structure that balance?
A lot of it was all about kind of capturing Raasay. It's an island that, obviously to me being from there, is incredibly unique. The views, just as an example, are incredible. It's the sort of place where you're seeing so much of Skye from the island. Anywhere you go, you've got breathtaking views of just about anywhere you possibly want. And what we were intending to do, the way I understand the founding and the beginning of the production of the spirit, was a lot of discussions with the locals and working closely with them. As we mentioned at the start, 140 people-ish when I first arrived back to the island in about 2005, and now climbing up to 179. Still a small place. The locals are important. Their opinions are important. And they described the island as having sort of character. It was bold. And so in designing a lot of our stills, short and broad, make sure that spirit's nice and bold. It's got character to it. And then the recipe, as you'll see soon, and I'll talk about in a wee bit, was very much born from creating something incredibly unique to match this very unique place. And as you say as well, you've got Skye to your next door neighbour, which casts a long shadow, especially now given its demand as a place of tourism. And thank you, Carlos, that's brilliant. Sorry. In a place in such demand, in a place that's so well known, there are some difficulties, of course, with regards to making Raasay stand out. But we decided to lean into the actual things that Raasay does, its geology, its history, its stories, traditions, its characters, and ended up with the spirit you'll see shortly.
Before we go on to the details of the spirit itself, tell us a bit more about the island. Is it popular for tourists? Is it quite well set up for that?
We're certainly getting there. We've got the benefit of seeing how Skye has dealt with the sort of increase over the last 10 years. So we are certainly growing in that regard. 10 years ago, when I first started working on the island in the hotel, as it was, when I first started working there, the story was always, I booked your hotel because I thought I was coming to Skye. And so gradually over the last few years, you've begun to see Raasay become its own place in that sort of sense. People are coming, be it for the whiskey, for the distillery, even just to see the island, trace heritage. And so as things gradually progressed and the place got busier, we are obviously ecstatic. The more people are able to come, we believe we've got an incredible place. But there'll always be that kind of bottleneck with the ferry where we're never going to be too busy. So you'll never be lost for that kind of tranquility that you want when it comes to visiting here, because there's always going to be a limited amount of people that can actually set foot on Raasay at any given time. So even if you want to go for a walk basically anywhere, you'll barely see anybody when it comes to sort of kicking about. So you've got that big benefit of there's the busyness, if you want it, in its main hubs, and the quietness and the serenity of kicking about in the wilderness and having a wee dram as well, which is very beneficial.
Yeah, nice. So there are hotels ready to cater for tourists, presumably.
So we've got one major hotel, Raasay House, and we are sistered with them because Raasay House is that big Georgian-like sandstone mansion, absolutely gorgeous spot. And then there's also a few various little places that you can stay. The Raasay Gallery is one of the big ones. We've got a few local artists that have art on display throughout the gallery, and it's also a B&B, so you can stay in that as well. Alt Irish, which is run by one of my good friends, a girl I grew up with, and her mum, who look after the place as well. Another excellent place to stay. And of course, we're hoping that more people will want to come and actually experience our wee island as it is.
Well, I bet the distillery is going to, or already is perhaps, but it's going to really be a great draw for people. There's a lot of people out there that just want to tick off more whiskey distilleries for obvious reasons. Many of them, no doubt, watching us right now. What better excuse to go and visit some of the most remote parts of Scotland than to go and have a dram and sort of taste the character of the landscape,
Yeah, absolutely. That's a phenomenal way of putting it. Better than I could have said myself, actually. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Cool. So let's talk a bit about the spirit itself. Now, you're making peated and unpeated whiskey, right?
Yep, that's correct.
And then it's blended together, but the maceration is not quite as simple as that. Is it three different types of cask you're using as well?
Yep, 3 different types of cask, and then you fill separately with peated and unpeated spirit, and then mature them for currently the youngest cask in this one is 4 years and 10 months. Right. So we are aging them as much as we can. For the most of the time, throughout the year, we are filling ex-Kentucky rye casks. As you'll see, the Kentucky rye cask forms the main body of our spirit. And the other 2 types of cask, you're looking at an ex-Bordeaux red wine for some lovely, fruity, juicy flavors, some nice tannins to lend some spice, and then a virgin American oak as well. So it's a yellow oak by the name of Chinkapin oak that we take to a cooper, heavily char the inside, and get some nice demerara sugar from it as well.
Yeah, it's the first time I've seen Chinkopin oak listed as a sort of type of barrel. I don't know if I've ever encountered that before. But I had to Google it. Never heard of it. But so, what do you say? It's a type of yellow Canadian oak. Is that what you said?
I believe it's colloquially known as yellow oak. We source it. Well, it grows wild around like New York State, and the Northeast US.
Okay.
Coming down towards my US geography is terrible. I want to say like Michigan area by the sort of like Great Lakes.
Yeah.
So it sort of grows wild around there and is sourced from there and then brought to Kentucky and then shipped over to us.
Nice. Cool. Yeah. So in terms of the whiskey itself, we've got some tasting notes coming up. So I'm going to pop some of them up on the screen. And while I do that, maybe I'll give some opinion and you can obviously share your opinions on it as well.
Of course.
I mean, I think it's surprisingly well-rounded for a 4-ish, 5 maybe year-old whiskey. We're time and time again here surprised at Whisky Me because we often feature newer distilleries, and of course the way the industry is going now, there are just younger expressions coming through and non-age statement whiskies as well, with of course younger whiskey in them. We're continually surprised, which in itself is surprising, how well developed whiskies can be at these sort of lower single-digit age ranges. Which I think as an industry we've been somewhat fooled into thinking that whiskey has to be 10 or 12 years old in order to be ready, and whiskies like yours are kind of proving that actually if you're using good oak, blending well, looking after everything, and then it's perfectly possible to make really nice whiskey. And in fact, sorry, I'm rambling a bit here, but we're getting to kind of taste a lot more of the character of the distillery because it's not being kind of swallowed up with wood and all those lovely dessert qualities, vanillas and nutmegs and gingers and all that kind of thing that we get from a cask. But here we get to sort of taste some of that peat and maybe just that little slight salinity, being that it's a sort of island whiskey, whether it's actually there or slightly imagined through the sort of romance of the whole thing, I don't know. But it's just wonderful. It seems to me that there's a nice balance here. The wood has taken the edge off the kind of harshness of that initial new make character, but not really imparted a lot of character itself. What we're left with is just a kind of concentrated form of the distillery character itself.
Cool. No, I'm glad you think so, because it's a big benefit for us. And if anybody's interested in coming visiting, you'll see that throughout our production, we've kind of designed the distillery around the idea of making not just something that reflects Raasay, but also something with youth and with that kind of character. And as you say, the new make coming through has a bit of intentional sort of flavors to it, because when we specifically run our fermentation, we're trying to get flavors in that sort of align quite nicely with the Bordeaux red wine cask, some fruity notes coming through alongside that nice sort of new makeness. And that hopefully comes through when it comes to the spirit itself. And as you say, I'm glad to think so, because for me, when it comes to being able to actually taste the whiskey and taste the spirit, having grown up on Raasay, when I first tried it not quite a few years ago, we were very, very young, not very long ago at all then. When I first tried it a wee while ago, the tour I was given was by a boy I grew up with, and he was explaining everything, how it all goes down, how to taste it. It was the R01 at the time, and I had a sip and cut the spirit, had a bit more, and I found it very nostalgic in that sense. And I think, as you say, it's because you can kind of taste that spirit. You can get to the flavour of the island coming just from the still, as well as you say, from the wood. So that means a lot. That's really, really cool to hear. And of course, as well, Conan in the chat, don't worry, it's absolutely fine. Raasay's a tiny wee island. I wouldn't expect you to know of it. But I'm just glad that you think that it will come through when it comes to the flavours from the spirit as well as just the cask.
Yeah. Another one from Conan here. You don't presumably have an on-site cooper, do you? Maybe for repairs, but not for full-on construction of casks.
We don't know. When it comes to our coopering, I'm fairly sure. I could be entirely wrong, so please don't quote me on this. When it comes to a lot of coopering, I think the biggest master coopers are currently in Loch Lomond. Is that right? I could be wrong, but as he mentions as well, cooperage is a sort of dying breed, but that's sort of also part and parcel with the way that the training comes, because it's very much a master cooper who selects and trains new coopers to perform the services. And hopefully, given the way that Scotch whisky is currently going, and as you say, with many more distilleries, especially quite young ones, looking to experiment, you might see a growth in this kind of thing. To my knowledge, we are sort of looking after our casks ourselves and doing the best we can. I think the main cooper for Scotland might be in Loch Lomond. It's been a wee while since I've checked though, so I'm not certain.
Yeah, Speyside cooperage is one of the big ones.
Okay, cool.
It's I mean, it isn't exactly a dying breed in that these things still need coopering, and it is done by hand. But what is less common, in fact, incredibly uncommon these days, is to have an on-site cooperage at a distillery. It's the industry has effectively been centralized into cooperages that just specialize in that, rather than every distillery having their own. There are some distilleries that have got cooperages, though. Glenfiddich certainly have one. That one springs to mind, I guess, because of the quantity of barrels they've got. It makes sense. Though weirdly, they are just down the road from Speyside cooperage. It's only 5 minutes away. Cool. Well, look. Yeah, do you know what? Something just sprung to mind. This is going to be my tenuous segue into Abasolo. when I was rambling, in fact, about distillery character and how wood is a double-edged sword, a sort of homogenizer, if you like, of flavour. Everything, the longer you put things in barrels, the more everything tastes the same as time goes on. So if you want distillery character, you have to start with very little or no maturation. And I don't think there's a spirit that epitomizes that more than tequila. Of course, Blanco tequila has become, really, really popular because it has all that distillery character. And although I like añejo tequilas and reposados, you're kind of losing some of what makes it special in the first place. Why am I mentioning this? Because, of course, our next whiskey, and Gabriel, you want to hang in there and listen to what.
Of course, absolutely. I'm going to enjoy the dram myself.
Yeah. We're going to introduce Jon Anders from Abasolo. Hi, Jon.
Hello. Good evening.
How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. Thank you for inviting.
Now I'm getting a bit of echo back from you. I hope that our listeners can't hear it. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't really have a. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I think it might have stopped now. I think it's okay.
Okay, good.
Cool. Great. Thanks so much. It's great to have you on the tasting. I could see you waiting in the green room there as a little thumbnail with the distillery in Mexico as your background, and I was like, surely he's not actually sat outside the front of the distillery in Mexico, but you're not. I can now see it's a green screen.
Yeah, I mean, we could have done that. I got some friends in Mexico right now, so we could have done a live stream from the distillery, but it's really, really early in the morning there now.
Oh yeah, I guess it would be morning.
Right,
yeah.
Actually, no. I mean, it's midday. It's okay. It's fine.
That's early in the morning for a Mexican time. Right?
6 hours. So yeah.
Well, anyway, great. It's good to have you on board. We are. I mean, it's just super exciting. I think to be featuring Abasolo, the first dedicated Mexican whiskey distillery, and when I started reading about what you're doing there and the production, I just found it very intriguing and interesting. And of course, Mexico's history of corn is so rich and long that this whole thing kind of makes a lot of sense to me. So maybe let's start from the start, wherever you would like that to be. I don't know if it's talking about corn or whether it's talking about the distillery.
So I work for a company called Casa Lumbre. And Casa Lumbres very early got on the mezcal. They were part of the beginning of mezcal. So very, very quickly they went through and they made a mezcal. They made some tequila. They made some chili liqueurs and so on. And then they started looking at different ingredients, and they found out that even though in Mexico we've been drinking beverage made out of corn for thousands of years, nobody ever made a spirit out of it. So in 2017, they set up Abasolo. And the idea was to take heirloom corn or maize, as they call it, and then create a whiskey out of it. But for Ivan Saldana, that kind of came up with the concept. For him, it was very important that the maize or the corn should shine through. So as a whiskey, this is very, very young. So this is 3 years plus. And he never really wanted to make it an old whiskey. Okay, sure, the distillery is 2017. So yeah, you're not going to have tremendous amount of old stock. But the idea is not to have 19, 21, 28, and so on. You know, the Scottish, they have perfectly the whiskey category. So we very, very respectfully take off that Scottish whiskey hat, put it in the corner, and then put on a Mexican whiskey hat. What
Sombrero.
Could be. What is Mexican whiskey? We don't know because it's a brand new category. So as a whiskey, we are 3 years plus. Corn is a grain. So we are falling under the law of whiskey. But for Ivan and for the team, it was all about creating a whiskey that had the flavor of the raw material and a hint of the wood. So we're not going to see, we might going to see a 5-year-old, but more than that, whatever's been aged, we're going to be used a little bit as the top dressing in the blend. So the maize we use, I have some here. You can see it. So this is called Kakwas Sklinter, and it's a heirloom maize that grows in high altitude. The region where this distillery is set is called Yiltopec de Morales, and it's about 90 minutes north of Mexico. The distillery sits at 2,200 meters over the sea. It's one of the highest in the world.
Yeah.
We're also talking about that corn might have been invented in this part of Mexico 10,000 years ago, when we, as humans, took the wild maize and manipulated it to the maize we have now. But for us, because we wanted to make or create 100% corn whiskey, we had to think a little bit, because as you know, most of the bourbons, they need a little bit of malted barley to be added to your mash to get it to ferment. So we did slightly different. We're using also a very old process called nixtamalization. Nixtamalization is when you cook the corn in lime acid overnight. And of course, you know, we take a little bit out of that, of this maize that we have nixtamalization, and we malt it, and we do that off-site. And then we take the biggest part of it, and we create a mash out of it, and then we add champagne yeast, and then we ferment quite long, almost sometimes 7 days, also 3 to 7 days. So it's a very long fermentation. And of course, even when he created this, he wanted that acidity that came after that long fermentation. And as you probably know, you know, champagne yeast is a very lazy yeast, so that really suit our profile. So then, you know, we store it for 3 years plus in bourbon oak, mostly Heaven Hill, sometimes some Sazerac products as well. And again, you know, the idea was always about the flavor of the maize and very little of the wood. You know, as we know, you know, a lot of the flavors in whiskey sits in the oak, you know, and very little sits in the barley when we make it. And we wanted it to be the opposite, you know, we wanted to be the other way around. So, and also, funny enough, we are actually about to release a new make. Of course, we can't call it whiskey. Cool. So a clear corn spirit. So that's going to be very fascinating as well to see how that works as well. So.
Yeah, that would be interesting to see how the spirit has evolved from what time it has spent in the cask. I mean, it's always interesting to try new make spirit for that reason, but I think particularly with something like this, where, as you're saying, it's an heirloom variety of corn. It's the nixtamalization. I think I got that right, but maybe I didn't. Let's not dwell on it. And so to sort of experience that in a kind of eau de vie format, almost, unaged, unsort of touched by wood, will be very interesting indeed.
I got some questions, and it says, Carlos say, so at this altitude that we have, 2,200 meters, of course, we got crazy cold nights, and there has been snow in the winter, and then, of course, really hot days. And actually, one part of the warehouse is actually outside. So you just have a roof, and then it's open to the element on two sides. So, of course, in 3 years, we have more than 20% angel share. So, of course, crazy change. So you also get loads of interaction with wood as well for a very short time, because, the whiskey goes in and out of the barrels.
That altitude on distillation will affect the boiling point of alcohol and water as well, won't it? You wouldn't need to run the stills as hot, I wouldn't think. Since, is it 2,800 meters, did you say?
2,200 meters.
2,200, yeah. I mean, it's still pretty high. If you consider water boils at about 70 degrees on top of Everest, I think. So you're going to be somewhere between 70 degrees and 100 degrees, maybe 90 degrees, 95.
Of course, that will affect it, and also it will affect the fermentation as well. So there's so many elements. Also, this part of Mexico as well, it's very, it's a little bit dry as well, because you're that high up as well. So that, of course, will affect what's happening there as well.
Yeah. Show us that corn again, because those are the kernels of corn, right? They're massive.
So Caco squalinte. So Caco, so it takes the name from cacao, because they look like cacao nips. So these are a heirloom corn that we use. It's a no GMO. We work with 3 different farmers, and in the region of where the distillery sit. And again, they're massive, yeah.
Yeah.
Also, as well, these are also called in Mexico. They're called pozole maize. So if you're ever in Mexico and somebody invites you to eat pozole, please say yes. It's absolutely divine. Cool. Pozole is like a stew. You have it with pork shank. It's great on the first day. It's amazing on the second day. And on the third day, it's just out of this world. It just gets better.
Wow. I've already had dinner and I'm feeling hungry again.
Bucket list item.
They normally serve it in weddings. So like about 12 o'clock at night, 1 o'clock at night when the wedding's winding down, they serve pozole to sober everyone up, because everyone's going to home anyway. So
we need to get to a Mexican wedding. Right. So, taste-wise, for me, and by the way, everyone watching, get your tasting notes up. Carlos put up a good one. It's certainly got some of that tortilla characteristic. It's slightly nutty, I found. There's sort of a coffee element there, which maybe is the barrel characteristic creeping through. But then I get something like a pecan or a hazelnut, or like a sort of browny kind of flavor to it, which reminds me a little bit of like dark tortillas. It's really interesting.
I mean, the process that we use up to the fermentation is the same process as making tortillas.
Yeah.
So after you nixtamalize it, you take it out. The corn is wet, and that's normally where you used to crush it for making tortillas. Now we actually dry it and then grind it, and we dry it in converted coffee roasters. Before we then add it to the fermentation tanks, and then add water and yeast. So process up to fermentation is like, we also make a corn liqueur.
Yeah.
On the same distillery.
So cool, that. It's the best bottle going at the moment. Just incredible. Get it back up again. Let's just so everyone.
Please bring it back up. That's gorgeous.
For a bottle.
as a corn cob.
Yeah.
So the liquid of the corn is the same liquid as we used to make the whiskey. So.
Yeah, really good. So, yeah, I wish you had some to try as well, Gabriel, because it's such an interesting, tasty spirit, and I think it's just fascinating seeing the Mexican approach to this, given that, you know, as we've already discussed, you're kind of the masters of corn. You're doing it longer than anyone else. You do it in a sort of a greater variety of ways than anyone else. You eat it in a greater variety of ways than anyone else.
Well, we also used to make beverages out of there. There's a drink called atole, so it's fermented corn. So even when he created this, he wanted to take a little bit of that influences of all these native beverages that people used to drink thousands of years ago, basically fermented corn. Some of them was created with spit as well, and you chew on the corn and spit it out, and then of course that's fermented. And then, of course, creating a low ABV. I mean, it's not a beer, but a low ABV drink. So the element was that, because that's always been used in the culture of Mexico. But again, it's interesting with whiskey in Mexico because, you know, currently there's a lot of people. There's a few other companies that are distilling heirloom corn whiskeys in Mexico. There's a couple of guys out of Oaxaca, but in Mexico you have a great tradition of making whiskey dating all the way back to the Prohibition, where some of the whiskey distilleries or bourbon distilleries in the United States relocated in Juarez in northern Mexico, where they made bourbon for many years. Sorry, you couldn't call it bourbon because it was made in Mexico, but bourbon style, if you may.
Yeah.
So you know, whiskey's being made. There's also somebody in Mexico also making a more of a Scottish type, if you want to. So they take an influence from Scotland and trying to create something that's more of a whiskey from Scotland, or what a whiskey from Scotland would have tasted.
So obviously we are intrigued by this Mexican whiskey product, and you know, I think judging by the comments, everyone is very interested in it. What is the reception in Mexico itself? Is there a good market for domestic whiskey production? Is that something that's going to need nurturing a little bit, or, you know, are you barely able to produce enough for the whiskey-loving masses of Mexico City?
Mexico is very strange when it comes to drinking whiskey. So they love whiskeys, and they drink a brand called Bucanas that I believe it's a Glenfiddich made brand, and it's just made for Latin America. And of course, they drink a lot of Johnny Walker. But they drink bottles. I mean, you go to the club, you don't drink glasses. You actually have bottle service. But the response in Mexico, especially, you know, with the younger crew, it's been amazing. You know, the response has been amazing. But I think for the general population, they're not aware of it. They want to drink whiskey from Scotland. They want to drink the more commercial brands. But I hope, you know, at least we can have a little focus on it, and then maybe we change one person here and one person there.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Maybe the last question. What's the story with the distillery architecture? Great question, because it is quite striking. And if you haven't seen it properly, and you can obviously get an idea of it from behind Jon's head there, go onto the blog post on the Whisky Me website, because there's more pictures of it on there. But yeah, Jon, go for it. What's the story with that?
So it was designed by a friend of Ivan, the creator of the brand. And it takes the inspiration from a way of storing maize called cinco lotes. It's actually a box they created to actually safeguard and dry the maize before you start using it. So when they designed the distillery, that they took influences from that way of storing maize or corn.
Interesting.
Cool.
Yeah, it's a cool looking building, kind of modern, but then traditional at the same time, which obviously sounds stupid, but it really does have that look about it.
It was a bespoke distillery made just for Abasolo and Nixon.
Yeah, I can believe that.
Cool.
Cool. Well, look, that's great. Unless there's anything else, I think we'll kind of wind it up there because it's been a huge download of information from both of you, which is amazing. I mean, both distilleries founded in 2017. I hadn't realized that until we started this conversation tonight. And both distilleries doing amazing things. So well done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you for inviting.
And
I feel like I've got a new bucket list spirit.
Sorry, say again, Gabriel.
So I feel like we've got a new bucket list spirit.
I know. Right?
This would be incredible. As you said, like I'm gutted I'm not getting to try it tonight. Oh, he's come to Mexico now. Sorry, please carry on.
I'm with you. Yeah. All right. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.